How's it going, everyone, and welcome to Four Mile Ranch. Today I'm excited to be sharing with you another digital optic review on the channel, and today's comes in the form of the AITO Alpha Smart Day-Night Rifle Scope. So that's kind of a mouthful. I'm going to call it the AITO Alpha or the Alpha for the sake of this video, but in short, what is the Alpha? It's a 3 to 24 power smart rifle scope like the title suggests. It has a number of features which I'll be sure to get into in this video, and it also is a great performer in both the daytime and the nighttime. So spoiler alert, the heart and soul of this guy is a Sony 4K sensor, which is what really intrigued me in doing a review of this optic. So it is very capable of producing some pretty impressive images, especially for the price point. So now, on that note, I want to go ahead and disclose that AITO did reach out to me to see if I'd be interested in putting a review together for the channel, and I accepted. And they also sponsored 500 rounds of ammunition, which let me put this optic through its paces to see if there's any reliability issues, and of course to familiarize myself with the optic. So as part of me wanting to share my honest and unbiased opinions, I wanted to disclose that so you can, if you feel like maybe I'm biased to the optic, again, you have all the insights you need to know. That's the only relationship or lack thereof with AITO and myself. I've been testing the Alpha now for roughly 4 months to date, and spoiler alert, I haven't had any major issues with it. I've been very pleased with it, but I want you to make your own opinions, and I will have timestamps below if you don't want to sit through the whole video, where you can skip to what you may be interested in, because I like to be as detailed as possible in these reviews so that you can make the best decision possible if this optic is right for you should you be on the market for a new digital rifle scope. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and dive into the AITO Alpha review. So first and foremost, I do want to just talk very top level the features of this rifle scope. So like I mentioned, the heart and soul of this optic is a Sony 4K sensor, which is what really sparked my interest when AITO reached out to me. I've done a few reviews on the channel already of something very similar to what you're seeing here today. And normally I'd say, hey, I don't really have the time, or I'm not interested in doing that kind of review since I've already done a few on the channel. I try to look for variety, but the fact that it has a Sony 4K sensor really truly caught my attention. I wanted to test it and evaluate it for you guys. What you're watching me on right now is a Sony camera as well. So I'm a Sony fanboy when it comes to their camera tech, or I'm way invested in their ecosystem for putting videos together on the channel. So again, really got my curiosity, and I was very pleased with the performance that this sensor was capable of, and hopefully you'll see that in the sample footage. It's very impressive. To date, I believe it's the only true 4K exported image that I've gotten from a digital rifle scope, although some of the other ones I've tested on the channel have 4K base sensors to let you digitally zoom in more. They only exported 1080p video files. So when editing the footage from this, I was truly, my computer was reading it as a true native 4K video file, which I found very impressive, and the clarity, again, reflected that on my end editing. Hopefully YouTube compression doesn't take away from the quality that I was able to see raw right out of this scope. So moving further, again, top level, just discussing the features. It does have a rangefinder function. I will talk a little bit more detail about that later in this video. And as part of that rangefinder function, it's kind of paired with a ballistic calculator that's on board within this optic. Now, disclaimer with any ballistic calculator on digital optics, because it's becoming a very common feature, and it should be for anyone getting into the digital optic game to stay competitive with other features of their competition. It's only going to work as well as the ballistic data you feed it. So you really need to know an accurate ballistic coefficient of the ammunition you're using, accurate muzzle velocity first and foremost. So if you're just going off of what's on the box of your ammo, your mileage may vary because that's definitely going to be dependent on the barrel length or muzzle attachment, suppressors, etc. that you may have on your setup. So just keep that in mind. And of course your ambient conditions, how accurate, temperature, humidity, pressure, all that stuff. Now this scope does also have a one-shot zero feature, which I found to be very helpful in saving ammo for the fun stuff and not just spending a long time trying to get this thing zeroed. So it was very quick and efficient to get it zeroed with that feature. Again, they're staying competitive with the other features of some of the competition, what's kind of become the golden standard of digital optics today, one-shot zero being one of those features. It does have an advertised 6-hour battery life. It's an internal battery. It's charged via USB Type-C, which I appreciate because that's becoming kind of the, again, gold standard connection. USB Type-C, happy to see that. A lot of my batteries and other electronics use USB Type-C, so they went with a common connection. I appreciate that. It's not something proprietary to charge the scope. And the scope does have an app. It is Bluetooth and Wi-Fi compatible to connect to your smart devices. So if you want to preview your photos or videos, download them, or even better, have a live view of what someone is seeing through the optic. Again, they keep all the bases covered in terms of features, what's now become kind of the set standard for digital optics in 2023. The AITO Alpha keeps you covered across the board. So I always like to do a brief unboxing and show you exactly what you get right out of the box, but when it comes to this optic, I definitely have to do it because it comes in this pretty much a Pelican case, and I was very impressed because when you open it up, you are presented with a very impressive array of included accessories. So I'm gonna go over that so you know exactly what to expect. So you do get a standard set of 30mm scope rings, but you also get a nice cantilever 30mm mount. And it does have a railed section here, so you can choose to add red dots, IR, lights, etc. Now, while we're talking about mounts, you not only get one, but two IR illumination mounts. Now this guy is going to be convenient for mounting directly to the optic, more on that to follow, whereas this one is going to be better suited for mounting on a handguard. And speaking of IR, you do get an IR illuminator that's fairly compact, and as marked on the outside, it is powered by an 18650 battery, and no shortage on batteries because you are going to get 3 of them right out of the box. You do get a smart controller, a handy little micro SD card adapter so you can download your files, a rubberized rear objective eyepiece. Also included is a nice microfiber cleaning cloth. I find you can truly not have too many of these lying around. They will come in quite handy. The needed Allen wrenches, battery for the smart controller, a 64GB memory card, and not only do they include the memory card, but it is name brand. Lexar is something that I actually use pretty regularly for my cameras that I use to film videos like what you're watching right now. Now, I do want to point out on the note of the memory card, it is important to use a quality memory card because this optic has an advertised true 4K video output. So you can't just use any memory card, you know, the cheapest one that you find. They may not have the read-write speeds needed for 4K. So what you're going to look for is a V30 rated memory card at a minimum for 4K video. You have a USB cable, and of course, last but not least, the optic itself. So go ahead and take this time to walk around the exterior of the optic, where on top you have your controls from power to this push wheel, which not only can actually rotate left and right, but it actually does press to give you more functionality. We'll do a walkthrough of the actual menu system later in this review. On the left-hand side, you do have a Picatinny rail, and as briefly mentioned earlier, that's where this IR mount would probably be best suited if you want to package this all together, especially if you opt to use like a quick attach scope mount, and then it's an easy off and on total package for this device. On the right hand side, you have a rubberized cover for your micro SD card, as well as the USB-C. And like most typical optics, the front is going to focus to whatever you're aiming at, whereas the rear objective rotating ring is actually going to focus the image coming from the digital screen to your eye. So it is somewhat user customizable, which is always good. Now, I thought it was kind of cool. They did actually include a threaded front objective cover. Now this is going to be dual purpose. It's going to help from overpowering the sensor. I'm assuming that it's going to be a pretty light sensitive sensor for them to include this, but it'll also help protect that front objective glass. So I think it's cool to have. Maybe you won't use it, maybe you will. Not everyone includes those. Okay guys, so I wanted to do a real quick video just showing you the user interface and menu system on this optic. I am currently aiming at the backdrop here in the studio, so that is what you're looking at. The focus distance, I'm probably just barely closer than the minimum focus distance. It's about 4 feet away from the scope. So that's the first caveat. The second is that what you see here is nowhere near representative of what you're going to see through the optic. That's because it's a camera recording a digital screen, and if you could see the crazy stuff I have to do to even get this close to a good image, trying to record that little screen inside the scope, then I think you'd appreciate what you're looking at here. So I want to point that out. It looks amazing to the user's eye. Now I do want to point out a couple things on the overall interface. You can see at the top left it gives you an incline angle, so you can kind of orient yourself to how high or low. You can see I'm pointed slightly downwards right now in the studio at roughly -6 to -7 degrees, which is how sensitive this instrument is. Just me kind of walking around and moving the table that it's on, it's picking that up. You can see the compass at the very top of the screen. Again, it seems to be very sensitive. Top right of the screen, you got 60% memory card capacity left with what the card I have currently in there. It tells me that the Wi-Fi is on, so I could use the Wi-Fi to connect to the app. It also has the Bluetooth symbol, which is telling me is currently off. And then you have your battery life indicator in the top right. At the very bottom of the screen, you can see the zoom level. So as I zoom in, and again, I am within the minimum focus distance here, so that's why it's getting pixelated. It's not representative of how great this thing can zoom in digitally, as you'll see in the sample footage. The bottom, it shows you the mode that I'm in, currently in the video mode. If I tap the record button, you'll see that it starts counting, it starts recording. So very, very user-friendly there. And in the bottom right, it tells me what the current resolution is. Now if I hold that button, I'll switch over to photo mode. And then it'll tell me what the resolution is on the photo side as well. So holding that again, I can go back to the video mode. And that's pretty much it for the overall interface, just to orient you on what you're actually looking at before you pop up the menu when you're putting your eye up to the scope for the first time. So nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and hold down the main scroll, and that will pop up the menu. So you can see right away we have an illumination. If I click again, you can toggle that quite a bit. So for the sake of this video, we'll leave it about right there. You can adjust the contrast. You can play with the default zoom. You can adjust your resolution and video settings. So I currently just leave mine at 4K 30. I don't really have a need to do 4K 60. But as you can see, you can do some really, really slow-mo stuff if you scale down to 1080p, and that's just to save on the processing and battery power needed in the scope. So if you want that ultra slow motion footage, it does have that. You do have video playback, so you'll see some of the footage that I've recorded. You can format the scope, obviously not going to do that. Taking it further, you do have even more advanced controls if you want to adjust what the scope is doing behind the scenes. So for example, you can set your video EV, which is going to be essentially the exposure compensation, where it's going to try to adjust how bright or dim the scope is naturally going to get that image. You have an ISO adjustment, which is essentially telling that sensor how sensitive you want it to be to light. So you can increase the ISO value, which is going to make things brighter, but you're also going to induce noise. You can adjust the sharpness, the metering, the saturation. I mean, all kinds of camera functions that you would see on a digital camera, since it does have that Sony sensor. I mean, you can really dive into the nitty-gritty should you want to. I mean, there are just the most detailed settings I've ever seen on a digital optic. So pretty impressive what they allow you to do here. So I'm just going to keep scrolling just to give you an idea. And now we're back. Now this is going to be how you actually zero in the scope. This is the crosshair calibration. So if you click on that, you'll basically aim at the bullseye, and then you'll drag that cursor. You can see where my zero currently is to where that impact point is. So I don't want to adjust this. It's currently zeroed for the rifle that it's on, but that's how you get that one-shot zero function, which is pretty standard for most modern digital rifle scopes nowadays. You'll also see that there are 4 different profiles that I could be selecting from. So if you put this on a quick detach mount, you can go ahead and swap that from setup to setup and maintain 0. Now next is going to be COO, which according to the manual stands for coordination, and it's supposed to allow you to save different crosshair calibration positions in different environments. Now next on the menu is COO, which according to the manual is standing for coordination, and this is supposed to allow you to save different crosshair calibration positions in different environments. That being said, when I select it, it appears that the first profile is the same as my first 0 profile. So admittedly guys, I am a little thrown off by what they are intending here, but just walking you through, I have not personally used this or had a need to use this. You can see I only have one 0 profile set while I've been playing with this optic for the review, but wanted to walk you through the menu nonetheless. Now next is where you can change your reticle type. So you'll notice that the reticle is kind of changing. I'm just going to walk you through what that options are. Now BA is your ballistic calculator. Now I do want to caveat that whenever you're using a digital ballistic calibration system, it's really only as accurate as your input parameters. So you can see here, if you do end up using this optic, these are not going to be your factory settings. I did play around with it fairly successfully on my end, and more on that to follow. But here's where you put in your input parameters for that system. Next is going to be your ranging reference system. And I'm going to get into that here in just a second. We're almost through the menu. I want to spend a little bit more time covering that, so skipping ahead, here's your auto recording features. If you do want to set the scope to auto record based on it detecting recoil, you can set that. So you can set it to before when you pull the trigger or after you pull the trigger, and a set amount of time. So before fire 5 seconds, after fire 15 seconds. I currently have that off. I've been manually recording. Here is your Wi-Fi, and you also have Bluetooth because you can connect it to an app. And then you have the mode to toggle between daytime and nighttime. So when it says night, it's in night vision. When it says day, it's currently in daytime mode. And then back to the illumination. Okay, so I talked about wanting to spend a little extra time on the rangefinder feature because I think it really does need to be pointed out by itself. So this is a pretty cool feature. So first here you have your reference height. So for me, I happen to be shooting at a 1/2 meter steel target at 500 yards. It's a bummer because unfortunately what I'm about to show you only shows up to the user's eye, which honestly is probably for the best so it doesn't crowd your video, but I can't show you this actually at the range. So you're gonna just have to follow along with me here. So let's say you chose your reference height of, this is custom, so if you know the size of your target, you can put it in. They do have some common animals, and you can tweak those heights if you disagree with them. So currently, I have the 0.4 meter selected. So I'm going to go ahead and back out. Now there's a button on the scope. It's the top right on the scope. You just tap it, and it gives you that reference height. So if that target that I had 0.4 meters was top and bottom, then you can see right in the center how there's now a circle over my reticle. That's where my 0 would be. But as you zoom in and zoom out, you'll see that that reference line changes. So now if that was top and bottom of my target, you can see where that circle is going vertically on my crosshair, and now you can really see it where it's completely below that reticle. That's where this rangefinder comes into play. It's going to show you the drop, and you see at the bottom of the screen, that's where my hold would be at 656 yards using that height as a reference. So as I zoom in, less drop, this would be 424 yards. So again, we're that 0.4 meters at 100 yards because that's where my 0 is. That would be the height. So I'm going to get there right now. I guess it's not perfectly incremented. There we go, 101 yards, close enough. That's what I would see at that 101 yard field of view. So hopefully that makes sense. Obviously it'll get bigger as I'm closer, but as that shrinks, and again, you have to size it to your actual target, and this is only going to be as good as you know the size of the target and that ballistic data that you put in that I mentioned earlier in the menu walkthrough. So this drop is only going to be as accurate as the data you feed it. Nonetheless, if you know your data, this would be a handy little tool where you don't have to carry an extra rangefinder. If you know the average height of a wild hog or deer in your area, this is a pretty quick and effective tool that I thought was pretty neat. And again, I wanted to speak about by itself so that you guys could kind of get a picture of what this scope can do for you. Now, starting with daytime footage, look at the phenomenal clarity you can get. Zooming in all the way on that sensor, you can see the little berries on this tree from 35 yards away, giving you a more standardized idea of resolution, especially when digitally zooming in. We're looking at a standard 100-yard zero target at 50 yards away. Now, as you zoom in, you may notice what's known as chromatic aberration, which is that kind of purple silhouette around the really bright white images. Now, that is actually not uncommon for digital camera sensors, but it really becomes noticeable when you punch in on that image digitally. When you see that we're zoomed out like this, it's not as noticeable. But again, just wanted to point that out. At 100 yards, we're looking in the direction of the sunlight. This time we're not getting as much as that chromatic aberration, and you can clearly see impacts on paper at 100 yards. I apologize for how shaky some of these images are, guys. The camera, or the scope, has a pretty sensitive sensor and doesn't seem to have much image stabilization. So here's 100 yards off a bench, so a little less shake for you guys, but you can again see the impact at 100 yards. So you can use this as a digital spotting scope to track your hits. There's no need to bring any additional gear for your standard 100-yard zero. So this is where I did that one-shot zero before going on a hunt. Here's what I believe is a 6-inch gong style target at 200 yards. Again, I'm gonna punch in digitally on a lot of this, guys, so that you get an idea of what you are up against if you use this optic. And looking all the way at a 500-yard target. Now, keep in mind, a lot of what you may be perceiving as lost resolution is actually the extreme heat mirage. It is South Texas where I'm filming this. It was a pretty hot day out, but again, this is a 500-yard target on a hot day with all that heat mirage. You can see here, depending on the different light of the day, you get different levels of clarity in the footage, and I'm going to talk about that later in my conclusions on this video. Now, just taking it to the extreme end, this tractor shed is over 3,000 yards away from where I was filming. Of course, when you zoom in digitally that much, not a whole lot of resolution will be retained, especially with the heat mirage, but I mean, would somebody be standing out there? I think you could identify even what they were wearing. Now, taking a look at the nighttime footage, I'm going to start out with the stock or supplied IR illuminator that came with the optic. I'm looking at our gate, which is positioned 120 yards away from where I'm recording this footage. And I want to just kind of give you a feel here as I dial in that focus and kind of widen that beam, kind of what you get. So a little bit of washout. The sensor seems to be sensitive enough for that stock IR illuminator. And as I zoom in here to see how much detail is retained, I can make out the texture of the bricks. So a lot of the detail of the actual brick is still maintained. And as I zoom in to that hot spot, because we are at the tightest beam here, the scope is auto adjusting that exposure and it's not as washed out. Now when I zoom back out, that center brick is going to appear a little bit more washed out because it's trying to balance the overall image, which has a lot of dark and bright spots now. Do go ahead and take a look at this tree that's 330 yards behind the gate. Now, I also wanted to test the coyote cannon because that is the strongest illuminator in my arsenal. So I do want to test the absolute maximum potential of this optic when using that very, very powerful illuminator. And that's exactly what you're seeing here is going to be the coyote cannon for a good majority of the rest of the nighttime footage. Just again, because this is the absolute most you can get out of it. And it's actually funny because it looks like I got some coyotes in the field behind the gate, which I was not expecting, but there you go. You can identify animals hands down with this combination. And again, I'm going to go ahead and look up at the trees, which are 330 yards away from where I'm recording this. And I mean, you can see everything. Now, I'm not necessarily focused on the trees just yet, so I'm gonna focus in and make sure you guys get the absolute most resolution possible. But there you have it. I mean, that is a pretty good looking, for digital night vision, guys, that is a pretty phenomenal image that I'm getting out of this optic. Just giving you another scenario, we have a foreground here that's about 120 yards that bounces a lot of that IR light, and the tree line in the background is 350 yards. So this is a different dynamic. I wanted to see how the scope does when you have something in the foreground that's kind of giving you some of that IR splash coming back at you, but you also have something in the background. Now, conveniently, I had some coyotes show up. So here is me switched over to the coyote cannon now, and those coyotes are at 200 yards. And giving us some nice movement so we can test what the scope would look like when you actually are going on that nighttime predator hunt. And then the coyotes continued to help me with this review. They continued moving further away because I think they knew that I was watching them. And so now we have them at 475 yards away doing beautiful modeling for us. But for those of you guys that are getting irritated, I haven't shot anything, here you go. Okay, so I've been using the AITO Alpha for 4 months now. I've put 500 rounds of ammunition through it, and I've taken it to the range in different environments, both really hot Texas days, used it at night for hunting. I've really put it through its paces. I didn't intentionally abuse it, but I also didn't intentionally baby it. I wanted it to be as real world as possible. So throwing it in the backseat of my truck, driving off-road, hitting some bumps, taking it hunting, you know, accidental banging it around. Physically, everything is held up completely fine. Actually, the finish has held up very well. There's no scuffs, no wear. The buttons all have their tactile clicks, the wheel on top to control everything. I mean, if you told me this is brand new, I would believe you from a physical standpoint. Now, working our way inwards in terms of software reliability, no issues whatsoever, which is always a pleasure to share with you guys. Electronic optics can be a little finicky sometimes. They can be known to freeze or have other glitches. For a company that I personally have not heard of, when we're talking about AITO, the software was actually overall very well refined, so I am pleased to share that with you guys as well. Admittedly, and I'm not trying to sound like I am a huge YouTuber and got all this stuff going on, I really think I'm one of the really small guys on the platform actually, but I do get the optics that are sent to me mixed up at times, and I thought this was a $1,200 optic while reviewing it. As of the time of this video, this is only a $650 optic from the link that AITO sent me where they have it for sale online. So again, based on its performance and features, and the whole time I thought it was roughly twice the cost of what it actually was, because it really upheld that kind of baseline, at least with my experience behind this optic. So for $650, I think it's an excellent buy. There's only one nuance that I came across with this optic that is something that I can kind of harp on a little bit. And again, it may not be a big deal to you, but I want to give you as much information as possible. So given that this is a fairly light sensitive instrument, because it is completely compatible with being used at night like they market, and the imagery that comes out at night was beautiful for a 4K sensor. It did fantastic. Even though it has high resolution, the light sensitivity was more than acceptable, even with the stock IR illuminator. I was very impressed. That being said, if you're using it in a bright environment and you're facing the direction of the bright light, meaning the sun, it gets a little washed out in the image. So it loses contrast pretty substantially if you have nothing on the front objective lens. Now, AITO did include a front cap to reduce the opening diameter, reduce the amount of light, probably by about 75 to 80%. Even still, at really severe angles, the sunlight was able to go straight through the front objective lens and hit that sensor in such a way that a lot of the contrast was lost. Now, it's still usable, you can still tell what you're aiming at, but it's not going to be that beautiful 4K imagery that this sensor is absolutely capable of based on my testing with it. Now, keep in mind, I do a lot of stuff related to videography and things with cameras, so I think my standards and expectations may be a little high or possibly harsh, but again, the loss in contrast was repeatable and noticeable when you didn't protect this front objective lens from direct light exposure. Now, About a month into testing this optic, I let AITO know. I wanted to know if maybe did I have a defective unit? Hey, here's what I'm seeing. Sent them some sample footage. What's going on? They were surprised and concerned. What they ended up doing is sending me a sunshade, a traditional sunshade. And it is my understanding that this is now going to be included as part of the kit. So hopefully I am not incorrect in my understanding of that, but that helped substantially more than just that front cap. I think it got enough distance to where it made it much harder for a direct light ray to hit that sensor by just stepping, that much further out from that front objective lens. It didn't make it perfect. Still a little bit of loss of contrast if you're at the very, very severe angles, but substantially better. Now there are some temporary or universal, I should say, sunshades that have a rubberized piece, because that was one of the things that they sent me as a stand-in right away. And then they actually reached out to me again saying, hey, we now have a custom, machined aluminum sunshade that doesn't look cheap or tacky on the front of the scope. And they sent that to me as well. So that's what I ended up completing the review using. So of anything I can complain about, that's really it. Now, when you're in the shade or you're not aiming at direct or at the light source or the sun, no issues whatsoever. And at night, honestly, I was overall very impressed with the imagery you get out of this optic. Again, I thought it was a $1,200 optic for only $650. I don't know that there's many other options out there at that price point that can really compete with the performance of this. So from both a smooth running software right out of the gate, again, from a company that I had not personally heard of before, to it holding up physically, no loss of zero, no freezing. I mean, really no complaints other than the loss of contrast. For $650, I will take that one nuance and I'll roll with it personally. So, especially when you consider all the things that come right out of the box with this. If you didn't watch the unboxing, I recommend you check that out if you are considering purchasing this, because you get everything you need, I mean, right out of the gate. Now, the only thing I do want to point out is that although I think the stock IR illuminator was more than acceptable to get you started, I always recommend that you upgrade, and that's, again, I will annotate it in the test footage, but I use the Sniper Hoglights Coyote cannon. So I mean, it's not really fair, guys. I mean, it really is, it's a night and day difference in terms of what you get out of a aftermarket illuminator. And as far as I'm aware, the Coyote cannon from Sniper Hoglights is the most powerful IR illuminator that you can get out there. So it's big, it's bulky, adds weight, but this will let me see 1,000 yards through this optic. So again, if you want to get the absolute most out of it, I recommend, especially since it's only a $650 optic, pick up one of these guys, a couple $100 more added, and for still under $1,000, you have a phenomenal nighttime hunting setup. So without rambling any further, I'm thinking that that covers all the bases for the AITO Alpha review. If there's anything I left unanswered, or if you have any clarifications that you need, leave a comment below. I try to be as responsive as possible so I can, again, help you make the best decision for you if this is something you want to add to your arsenal and help your nighttime hunting setup. And with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to stop by the 4Mile Ranch channel. And as always, guys, have a good one.